are still coming in, but I'm going to go ahead and get started with my welcome. So welcome everyone. My name is Maura McGinty-Kloss. I am Director of Programs and Communications for the Natural Areas Association. And we're delighted that you're joining us for today's webinar, Boldly Mapping, Leveraging NASA Missions in ArcGIS for Invasive Species Challenges. And I was mentioning earlier, for those of you who are just joining, we have registration spanning over 15 countries, including the United States, and every state in the United States, including Hawaii and Alaska, are represented. So we'd like to thank Esri for underwriting this program and making it freely available to everyone. Thank you, Esri. This is a valuable partnership that we greatly enjoy working with you. So for those of you new to the Natural Areas Association, we are a national nonprofit organization that serves those who steward the land to protect biodiversity. Our mission is to get quality science and best practices into the hands of those who can make an impact on the ground by sharing applied science, practical solutions, and new knowledge through both in-person and digital opportunities. NAA's digital content includes symposia, webinars, and videos, and we release new content every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. We also publish our Natural Areas Journal, a quarterly peer-reviewed journal, and distribute the Natural Areas News twice a month, which is emailed directly to your inbox. NAA is available wherever you are located, wherever you are in your practice, and wherever you are in your career, and most importantly, whenever you have time. And I'd like to take just a moment to thank those of you who, even though Esri underwrote this program, took the time to contribute to support NAA in our programming. Thank you. So if you'd like to know more about the Natural Areas Association, here's a quick QR code where our website is naturalareas.org, and you can see all of our future programming. And I'm just going to show you a couple quick upcoming webinars. Invasives Free USA, a long-term approach to managing invasive species, is on November 19th. And then on December 3rd, U.S. and International Vegetation Classification Hierarchy 3.0, alignment with IUCN and application for SWAPS swaps. And now let's get to today's program. Before I introduce today's presenters, just a few housekeeping items. If you haven't already and you wish to use captions, you can turn them on by selecting Show Captions on your navigation bar. And we also encourage you to participate in today's sessions. Please post your comments or shared resources in chat. And then if you have questions, please limit and post those in Q&A, because that is where Sunny and Brock and Kevin will be looking for questions, and they'll be answering them throughout the program, as well as at the end when we have Q&A on screen. And please know that this program is being recorded. Everyone registered for the webinar will receive an email with the link in about a week. So our first presenter today is Brock Blevins, Training Coordinator for NASA's Applied Remote Sensing Training Program. He has helped to promote and produce online and in-person training since 2013 and worked with the IUCN since 2007, representing the Species Survival Commission and the Commission on Ecosystem Management. He has also served as a co-lead for the Commission on Ecosystem Management Thematic Group on Ecosystem Restoration, and recently the Regional Chair for North America. Our next speaker joining us will be Kevin Butler, a project engineer on Esri's analysis and geoprocessing team, working as a liaison to the science community. He holds a PhD in geography from Kent State University, and over the past decade, he's worked on strategic projects, partnering with customers and other members of the science community to assist in the development of large ecological information projects, such as the ecological land units, ecological marine units, and ecological coastal units. His research interests include a thematic focus on spatial statistical analytical workflows, a methodological focus on spatial clustering techniques, and a geographic focus on Puerto Rico and Midwestern cities. And now for our speaker who will kick things off, Sunny Fleming is the Director of Environment and Conservation and Natural Resource Solutions for Esri. With a background in plant ecology and botany, she has applied location intelligence throughout her career, from monitoring species in the field to helping state parks manage recreational assets across their systems. She continues to pursue her passion for the environment and by now supporting others in applying location intelligence to their work. So Sunny, I'm going to let you take over from here.
Thank you so much. All right. Grabbing the screen. I'm so excited seeing all these folks rolling in. And that should be sharing my screen, but can I get a confirmation?
Correct.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's get things kicked off. I am so excited about the spatial breadth that we've received with interest and registration. I'm still watching these roll in on the chat. That's so cool. But I want to get things kicked off. This is a pretty exciting topic for me, and it's also close to my heart at this moment. But one of the things that I wanted to start with is really talking about a personal experience that I've dealt with lately and how it ties to this. And you heard the mention that we're coming off of the Natural Areas Association conference, where I was really honored to be the plenary speaker. And I had one kind of presentation set up prior to Helene. And then after Helene hit, I did my plenary just a few days after that experience. And so I just completely had a kind of a new message, and not so much a new message, but I think I was a little more pointed in my message. And it was really that as environmental professionals, with these catastrophic events exacerbated by climate change, whether it's invasive species or other work that we're doing as environmental professionals, we're feeling the traumas of climate change every day in our work. And that Helene really represented what was kind of a very, specific and intense moment. But we're all kind of feeling this together. But because of that, and because of the work we do and how important it is, it's also, in many ways, I would even go as bold as to say a moral obligation to tell our story and to tell the unique science that each one of us as an environmental professional holds in our head, to tell that story in a way that is accessible to people, relatable to people, and accelerates the work that we do. And so what we're presenting today, and part of the inspiration behind this webinar today, is to think about the advancements that have been made with things like remote sensing technology and the ability to analyze that, and how it can play into our work and accelerate the work we can do. And I threw this example up here real quick. And this came out of Helene, and it's from USGS, and they're leveraging NASA data sets. They're leveraging data sets that were acquired by the state. They're leveraging all sorts of different remotely sensed data sets to do a change detection and see where landslides had occurred. And not just where landslides occurred after Helene, but understanding where those landslides impacted, in this case, infrastructure. But when I think about that method, as it applies to the work we do as environmental professionals, those same methods and those same data sets can be applied to help us understand where our natural resources have been impacted and where we can predict that and prioritize that. And in many cases, especially with these landslides, the opportunity for invasive species to take hold there and what that means for this region overall, this region of Appalachia, which is so high in biodiversity. And so I thought that was a really kind of pertinent example. This dashboard got stood up roughly a week after the hurricane occurred. So a really quick turnaround using things like imagery and LiDAR, et cetera. So I wanted to kind of bring that to bear and center this discussion that we're going to have today in something that's very personal to me. And I mentioned climate change. We as environmental professionals understand innately the consequences of an unhealthy environment. It's the work that we do day to day, but it can be really abstract for others. And it's becoming less abstract as the consequences of this become more visceral, as we have these intense hurricanes and these storms and these wildfires and flooding and drought. It's making it very real for people and bringing new voices to the table on trying to tackle this. And so that can be a really good thing. And one thing that I hope is dawning on people outside of our sphere, and I think this graph is something that we know intuitively, is that our economic systems and our social systems can't exist or are intertwined with the health of our environmental system. And what that is doing is creating a lot of new interest in this, new funding in this. And I think we know this, right? But it's really important that we leverage tools like GIS to bring people to the table and help them understand what we can do, what we can plan for, how we take action, and then how we measure the success of those actions so that we can quickly iterate on those things and adjust where we need to. The webinar that we're doing today, interestingly enough, we actually did a invasive species series with Natural Areas Association in 2023. But that one really focused on a couple, what I'll call patterns of use, and I'll go into that in just a second, but one using field maps and one using something called ArcGIS Hub, really for the fieldwork component, and then also for leveraging things like ArcGIS Hub to bring in volunteer forces and help with these things. And so we're going to be sending all of these materials in a follow-up email, including this, but I put this on the screen just to let you know that I think the webinar we're doing today is going to be very nice and complementary to these webinars that we did in 2023. I mentioned those patterns of use. Well, okay, Sunny, what is that? That sounds very jargony, and it kind of is. But when we think about GIS, we can think about all of the things that it helps us do. And environmental professionals, I've noticed, and I'm even guilty of this, we're some of Esri's longest standing customers. And so we're very comfortable with desktop GIS, or at least I was before I came to when I used to work for Tennessee State Parks. And that allowed me to start working with rangers in the field and start providing dashboards to my leadership. And it took me beyond the world of analytics and into these other patterns of use. And so you can see those here. Those webinars that I mentioned that we did in 2023, they really focused on these three patterns of use, out in the field, but then that constituent engagement with ArcGIS Hub and that sharing and that collaboration and that transparency and that commitment to open data. But what we're really going to focus on today is more of these components, the mapping and visualization, the monitoring and the analytics, using techniques that leverage remote sensing, Earth observation, ArcGIS Pro, and a wealth of resources that I want to make sure that our community is at least familiar with and understands how to get started with. So those patterns of use can be organized by geographic information systems, or GIS. And I just want us to kind of start thinking outside of the box and start challenging ourselves to think about, how do we leverage GIS today? And does it really take full advantage of all of the ways that GIS can be used? And it enables something called the geographic approach, which I think for a lot of us is a very intuitive way of thinking, measuring and assessing data, understanding it, applying that understanding and taking a action on something. And it's iterative, right? But the way that we work geographically. Invasive species exist here, they don't exist there, they could exist there. Can we predict that? And then when we take action on that, what are the results of that, right? And this understanding is iterative and goes round and round, but it's tied to geography. And so geographic information systems enables this kind of framework for how we think about. There's a lot of attention right now on invasive species, especially here in the US. So this is coming out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And I know we're a week away from an election here in the US and people go, oh my gosh, but this could change. But I want to let people know that a lot of that funding, it has been appropriated. And so there's still going to be a lot of opportunity coming in the next few years around how we leverage those bills to tackle these priority issues for ourselves. And so I just wanted to put a couple examples on here. But the way that I suggest that people take advantage of these resources is go to grants.gov and literally type in invasive species in the search. And it brings up a wealth of different grant opportunities but also make sure that you are engaging with these associations like the Natural Areas Associations that are always putting out different kinds of materials and news, et cetera, to ensure that you're not missing these opportunities that may come from other sources outside of those laws. Now, one question I get asked all the time is, does GIS have a grant, right? Can I find a grant to just buy GIS products? And the short answer is yes, but. And what I wanted to do is, I love this exercise. I've gone through this exercise a couple times where I've gone to grants.gov, I've looked at different grants in their language, and I've pulled out these quotes. And then I think about how those requirements of those grants can be supported by GIS tools and justified. You can justify your expenditures of those grants on GIS tools. So when we think about inventory and document, well, that can be done either out in the field directly, or you can do it with remote sensing, right? And so you have a lot of opportunity to apply things like field maps or Survey 123, or even ArcGIS Pro and licensing around that for that requirement. Prioritization and treatment within a given geographic area. I mean, that should be very intuitive, right? How do we leverage these tools to prioritize and measure those things and have our specific area of interest that we're working in? Promote public engagement and learning opportunities, and then this public education and outreach activities. That's where I've mentioned a couple times already the use of ArcGIS Hub for conducting those kinds of activities. Telling your story through things like story maps, summarizing your results and things like dashboards, giving people a nice interface and a way for themselves to actually get involved on, we used to call them weed wrangles. I don't know how pervasive that is across the US or even globally, but it were these volunteer events where we'd go out, we would target invasive species, and it was kind of a fun day with the community. We called them weed wrangles. Well, you can organize something like that using ArcGIS Hub. So enough about that, though. I want to give you some direct examples from your peers. And I tried, knowing that we have a global audience today, which is super exciting, I tried to pull some of these examples from other areas outside of the US. So we have the use of GIS for conservation planning and monitoring. This is coming out of USAID and Tanzania. We have this example here from Belgium, and there's a lot of like pest control examples. This is with the Asian giant hornet and some examples in the use of GIS there. Also mapping and monitoring of citrus greening in Brazil, which is hugely important to their economic systems. And I'm certainly, take advantage of that. I love my citrus fruits, right? This example, this comes from Hawaii, and it was with EOS positioning systems, and they were looking at native forest restoration and monitoring that over time. But one of the ones that we actually highlighted at the latest Natural Areas Association meeting this past couple weeks was from Michigan. And it was a model that they developed for invasive species prioritization and understanding that across lands in Michigan to figure out where are these issues having kind of the largest threat, whether that was to the ecosystem itself or the biodiversity. And they went through a great process of kind of like indexing this, prioritizing this, and using remote sensing techniques and AI and machine learning to determine that. And they have a fantastic story map that they've developed around this, and that I think we can either put that link in the chat or, again, I just want to reiterate, we're going to be sending out tons of resources to those who registered after this, and that will include that link. So today is really all about getting started. I want to make sure that our community is comfortable understanding what different kinds of data sets are out there that you can take advantage of. And so I'm so thankful to NASA for them lending their voice today on that front, but also how to leverage GIS tools to take advantage of these different data sets and ask some questions with it. But when you have a relationship with Esri as a company, you get access to all sorts of ecosystem of resources, so to speak, data and applications. If you aren't already familiar with ArcGIS Living Atlas, I highly suggest you check that out. It has these pre-trained deep learning models. It has authoritative data sets in there. It has web apps and maps. And one of the newest data sets that we have in there, we now have a partnership with iNaturalist. And so you can get their research grade observations across the world, pull those into your own web maps and applications, and analyze it yourself. So if you're already using iNaturalist and you're familiar with that, it used to be formerly that they had a little kind of search criteria on their page. They still do. You could go type in a species, download it, but there are some limitations there, and it could be really frustrating to do broader analyses. So now that this is an ArcGIS Living Atlas, it really opens up a lot of opportunity to do broader scale analyses, bigger analyses, ask more questions, and do it a little more seamlessly inside your own mapping applications. There's also solutions and training. We have tons of free training. There's a couple little screenshots I pulled from here that you might be interested in, but I really suggest you check out learn.arcgis.com. And thinking about these tools as COTS first, which just means, out of the box, right? Configurable, off the shelf. And then we have these things called ArcGIS solutions. I kind of think of these as empty templates that are ready to deploy. So if you have a workflow that includes something like field maps, but then it comes into ArcGIS Online and you want to create a little dashboard, or you want to have a report, a whole workflow, there's these templates that you can deploy and experiment with those and configure them for your specific workflows. We also have services. So there's a wide variety of ways that Esri can actually kind of hold your hand and help you out, whether it's, okay, we just want to stand up this thing and we've never really done it before and we need a little bit of hand holding, all the way to, we have a really complex workflow and we definitely need assistance. So anywhere on that spectrum, Esri can work with you hand in hand. And we also have, I think, over 3,000 business partners in our business partner ecosystem, whether those entities are data providers or whether they're providing you with services or software or consulting. There's a lot of opportunity to take advantage of people that know Esri software, but maybe they specialize in your specific area and can help you out with those specific things. So in that spirit of getting started, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to invite Brock Blevins from NASA to join us, and he's going to get us kicked off talking about data sets that are available through NASA's missions that we can take advantage of for this topic of invasive species. Brock?
Thank you. I will share my slides. Hopefully you can see that okay.
It looks good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for including us in this webinar. My name is Brock Blevins. I'm a training coordinator for NASA's Applied Remote Sensing Training Program, also known as ARSET. And I do want to give credit to some team members of mine, Sativa Cruz, Justin Fain, and Juan Torres Perez, all out of NASA's Ames Research Center for the content of this presentation. So just a little bit about ARSET. So we provide, it was developed to provide accessible, relevant, and cost-free trainings on remote sensing satellites, sensors, methods, and tools. Our training cover a number of topic areas such as agriculture, climate and resilience, disasters, ecological conservation, which is probably of interest here, health and air quality, and water resources. And these are tailored for audiences with a wide range of experience levels. If you Google NASA ARSET, it'll be the first thing that comes up. So we provide online or in-person trainings, usually about 18 online trainings per year. These can be live or instructor-led or self-paced. If we do bilingual, a lot of times we'll do that in Spanish as well. So we'll deliver one in the morning in English and one in the afternoon in Spanish of the same topic. Like I said, we accommodate many different levels of experience from those who are not familiar with remote sensing at all. We like to create this largest on-ramp for new users as possible. Okay, so I'll highlight remote sensing as a tool that can help us monitor invasives. They also help us develop models that can predict where invasives are likely to spread. Remote sensing of invasives has increased in popularity, evident by the increase in the number of publications using the term remote sensing and invasive species. So remote sensing is being used as a way to monitor invasive species combined with in situ measurements. Just a little bit of physics. Just want to go over a couple things here because these kind of dictate the data sets that we will be talking about. So what is remote sensing? It's a science of collecting information from an object from a distance. This can be done in a variety of ways, whether it be ground-based, airborne, space-based methods, satellites. Remote sensing is helpful, and it allows for a large area monitoring, which measurements that are consistent, objective, and repeatable. It also allows us to, it's good to compare with ground measurements. They can offer a time series capability to help us learn about species in remote locations that are maybe difficult to access. And different sensors are used depending on their particular application. So how does it work? The energy the Earth receives from the sun is called electromagnetic radiation. This energy or radiation it's reflected, absorbed, or emitted by the Earth's surface or atmosphere. And satellites carry sensors which help us to measure this electromagnetic radiation that's either reflected or emitted from terrestrial or atmospheric sources. The electromagnetic spectrum. This consists of the range of radiation organized by wavelength. Radio waves on the left, longest wavelengths, lowest frequencies. X-rays, gammas on the other side, short wavelengths, high frequencies. But we really want to focus in on the middle here, the visible light, with a little bit of infrared and ultraviolet. So the human eye can detect the visible light range, as highlighted here with the rainbow. The sensors gather that information about the world around us in more detail across the spectrum. So that brings us to spectral signatures. This graphic displays the percent reflection at different wavelengths for a couple different examples here. For instance, soil, vegetation, water. These sensors are able to differentiate that as shown here. These are sort of like wide-ranging examples. The percent reflection is the amount of reflected energy that occurs for different materials along the electromagnetic spectrum. And this highlights wavelengths in the visible, near infrared, and intermediate portion. And these are just some terminology that you want to keep in mind as you're exploring data sets that we'll be talking about. So spectral resolution. Satellite sensors can collect regions on the electromagnetic spectrum at various wavelengths. And these are divided into that divide that range into bands. And the bands are essentially how big of a portion of the spectrum is included in that measurement. So spectral resolution signifies the number and width of these spectral bands. The higher the spectral resolution, the narrower the wavelength for a given channel or band. The more finer spectral channels enable remote sensing of different parts of the Earth's surface. And the spectral resolution depends on the satellite's orbit configuration, sensor design. Different sensors have different resolutions. So bands typically expand beyond the visible range of the infrared into the infrared spectrum and sometimes into the ultraviolet. So if you notice here, the bands between the multispectral and the hyperspectral sensors, which are increasingly becoming more available to us with new missions, and I'll touch on that. Hyperspectral has a higher resolution with more neural bands present. So it's sort of like the more bands, the more detail you can get in what you're observing. We also have spatial resolution from some very common satellites. Aqua is a mission, and MODIS is the sensor on that one that has a 250-meter resolution. Landsat 8, 30-meter resolution, and then Sentinel-2 out of ESA is 10-meter resolution. And what that dictates is the pixel size of that image. So that's the smallest possible feature that can be detected, usually meters. We also have temporal resolution. And this is an example of sort of that revisit time, the times that it takes to complete its orbit. And this depends on the satellite, the sensor capabilities, the swath overlap. And you can see the differences here between three popular. Landsat, you get an image at the same point on the Earth once every 16 days. Sentinel, 10 days. MODIS VIIRS, daily. So how can we use remote sensing for invasive species detection? Well, there's two primary ways that are used to determine invasive plant species, and one is to focus on the spectral differences of those species. And this is a diagram of a variety of different plant species. So they all kind of have their own fingerprint, if you will. Spectral differences also allow us to differentiate between surfaces through a process called classification. With enough information, it's sometimes possible to tell the difference between species of plants. And another methodology is to use the natural annual cycle of recurrent events as a seasonal cycle of a tree, which is known as phenology. Phenological events change from year to year. Timing of the events, the phenophase, such as flowering, leafing, migration, insect emergence, those can impact how plants and animals are able to thrive in their environment. Use of satellites and sensors allows us to track seasonal pattern variation in vegetated land surfaces, also called land surface phenology. So we can regularly monitor the entire global land surface, gathering information on entire ecosystems, allowing observations at a broad scale trends. However, it's most useful when linked with ground observations. And you can see some of the other infectious disease risk, invasive species and pest tracking, wildfire risks, and so on. So there are a couple of considerations that you want to keep in mind as you're looking at these data sets, and it'd be possible to list them all, but there are a few that are common enough to warrant mentioning. So many satellite-based sensors have spatial resolutions that equate to tens of square meters on the ground. So if you target a species of interest and it's not, established in unified stands representing a significant portion of an image pixel, it may be hard to pick up as compared with the background. Airborne sensors generally offer higher spatial resolution, but it can be a little prohibitive in terms of time and cost associated. But increasingly, drones have been a really good compromise for this, especially when pairing that with hyperspectral sensors. Satellites have a fixed orbit, which is characteristic, which limits how often we can see an image on the same part of the Earth. So you want to carefully consider the temporal realities of your environment to determine the maximum time between images that would still offer meaningful results. Okay, a little bit about the satellites and sensors that we'll be talking about here. One is MODIS. I mentioned that earlier. It's a popular multispectral instrument, hence the moderate resolution. It has an archive beginning back in 2000. Moderate spatial resolution of 250 meters, so that's the size of the pixel. They image the entire Earth every 1 to 2 days. So this is really good if you want some high temporal resolution data sets. PACE. This is a new one, really excited about this. This was launched earlier this year. Data starting to come in. It's a new mission. It's specifically focused on imaging ocean color with hyperspectral instruments at a very fine spectral resolution. Although it has a short period of record, PACE represents the latest advancements in our ability to image atmospheric and oceanic water, as well as our ability to monitor different types of plankton and algae. PACE hyperspectral information observes both the ocean and the land every day. And it's so exciting. It's their first global hyperspectral mission with almost daily coverage. So look for more of this to be in use. VIIRS. VIIRS is commonly compared to MODIS. It shares a lot of different similarities. It's got a revisit time of 16 days and whole globe imaging of 1 day, closely matches that of MODIS. Data is available from 2012 to the present and includes analysis products such as vegetation indices and thermal anomalies. The Advanced Very High Resolution Radiometer, AVHRR. This was built and operated by NOAA. It's aboard a constellation of satellites. This gives the sensor a high temporal resolution with an overpass twice a day. AVHRR offers a relatively long archive, but with a limited number of bands. And some of the products available are land cover and vegetation index products. Eco-stress. This is a targeted sender. It's aboard the International Space Station, and the primary purpose is measuring evapotranspiration. So the low Earth orbit of ISS, it limits the spatial resolution, but it provides a good temporal resolution for your areas of interest. This is an upcoming mission, the Surface Biology and Geology mission. It aims to meet the needs identified in what we call the 2018 Decadal Survey. Little has been settled regarding the exact specifications, hyperspectral and thermal data. They're all under consideration, but possible applications can include human impacts on the water cycle, biodiversity, carbon cycling, and others. GEDI, this is a great name. It's a suite of LiDAR products, and these are designed to peer deeper into the vegetated landscapes of the world. Using response times from its active LiDAR emitter, GEDI can peer into the leaves of tree canopies and offer insight into the structure of forested areas, such as canopy height, canopy cover, and vertical structure. Very exciting. And this represents a huge advancement over exclusively top-down characteristics of biomass, and they can be combined with other products to produce a more comprehensive view of forest biomass than was previously possible. All right, so that's the data. Those are the sensors, but how do we access and analyze this data? Earth data search is usually the first one that I like to bring up. It's a gateway for search and discovery of NASA's Earth science data. All you need is a login. It's free, open data center. You can sign up for access to a variety of data products. Some examples include data that might be useful for remote sensing of invasives are surface reflectance, leaf area index, NDVI, above ground biomass, canopy height, temperature, precipitation. So it's sort of a one-stop shop. Earth data search, very similar. It's easy to use access of the whole Earth observing data system here at NASA. And it allows users to discover, filter, visualize, very important, and access NASA data. And once again, that same Earth data login is required to download these data sets. So throughout the US, we have what we call DACs. They're distributed active archive centers. And effectively and efficiently, they serve out science to the user community. They're managed by the Earth Science Data and Information System at NASA. They all have a particular theme. And I'm going to touch on a couple of these here. Well, one in particular, that'd be the LPDAC. It's the Land Processes Distributed Active Archive Center. This is a NASA USGS partnership, and it's been going on since 1990. It's located in South Dakota and provides open, no-cost access to a large archive of land remote sensing data. Let me see here. One of the tools that came out of this DAC is really interesting that we like to highlight. It's called the VIIRS. This is a resource managed by the LPDAC, and it offers a simple and efficient way to access and transform geospatial data from a variety of federal data archives. It enables the users to subset using spatial and temporal band layer parameters. Two types of quests are available, point samples for geographic coordinates and area samples for spatial areas. Sample requests submitted into a VIIRS provide users with not only data values, but also associated quality data values. Interactive visualizations with summary statistics are provided for each sample within the application. And this allows users to preview and interact with their samples before downloading that data. Another web tool to explore is NASA's Worldview. It's a really nice platform. It provides users with real-time access to a wealth of satellite imagery and data. It's a powerful tool that enables scientists and researchers and the public to monitor and analyze Earth processes, including atmospheric conditions, land cover changes, natural disasters. So we've got a very user-friendly interface. You can create custom visualizations. It integrates data from an array of Earth observing satellites. So that's a really fun one to check out too. I put a couple resources here, although in each of the slides, there's links to relevant trainings that, or the missions or the sensors. But these are a couple here. I gave the presentation to Moira, so I think that you'll be receiving these as well. This is my contact information. I also still wanted to include Sativa, Justin, and Juan Torres Perez. You can follow us on X. We have an ARSET YouTube channel. All of our past trainings are available to self-pace through at any time with all the exercises, presentations, demos for you to peruse. And I also want to give a shout out to our sister programs, Develop and Severe. And thank you very much. I think that we'll be sending this over to Kevin next, but Sunny, I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Oh, that was great. And it did spur some questions. So I know when we get to our live Q&A, we'll be answering a couple of those. I'm trying to delineate them between what's NASA specific and what we can generally as a community answer. I won't get to those now. But yes, just to answer a common question that we're already getting, all of these resources plus links, plus PowerPoints, plus yada, 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 will be sent to presenters. So now that we've learned a little bit about the data sets that are available through NASA, we want to demo what it looks like to answer common questions using ArcGIS Pro. So Kevin, take it away.
Great, Sunny. Can I get a confirmation that you're seeing my slides and hearing me?
I am.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Sunny. I am not so pretentious that I have to use my middle initial in my name, but there happens to be two Kevin Butlers at Esri working on similar things. So if you see great blogs and wonderful material on remote sensing, that's the other Kevin Butler at Esri. But today we'll focus on invasive species risk assessment within our primary desktop product, ArcGIS Pro. And as you've already been encouraged, please provide feedback. One of the chief reasons that Esri likes to be involved directly with customers is that your feedback drives what we develop and what we fix within the software. And honestly, I sit within product development at Esri, and it is the primary driver for what we do. And we can only do that if you share feedback, both positive and negative, if that would happen to occur. So we encourage your questions today or anytime you would want to interact with us. So for my portion of the presentation today, I'll talk about the motivations for why we might be wanting to look at invasive species, a quick introduction to the target species, but the vast majority of what I will present today will be demos of actually modeling these things within the ArcGIS Pro software. And I hope we have time at the end for some questions. Well, a few caveats. I am not an ecologist. My training is as a spatial statistician. I sit within product development here at Esri, but I've had the great privilege over the last decade here of working with customers who are strong ecologists, conservationists, environmental modelers in order to produce some of these large-scale environmental information products. Also today, what I'm presenting is not a rigorous scientific analysis. Science takes more than 20 minutes in order to do, but we hope that it will inspire you or introduce you to some of these capabilities within the Esri ecosystem of software. And the path that I'm presenting, even within our software, is one of many different paths that you could take in order for monitoring, assessing, looking at invasive species. Okay, so looking at the motivation, Sunny outlined this very well, I thought. We are looking at climate change, biological invasion, and human modification. These are the things that are impacting biodiversity negatively the most. In climate change with wildfires, we've experienced this here at Esri, been evacuated a couple times. The biological invasion we see with these invasive carp is happening throughout the Midwest, and these contradictory problems of urban sprawl and insufficient housing. The humans are modifying the environment extensively. All of these things are impacting biodiversity. And there are consequences for these things. As Davison et al. Have outlined, because the climate is changing, species will migrate to follow their preferred habitats. And invasive species that are already here will find new areas for establishment. And these will indeed have negative impacts on biodiversity and human well-being. We'll look at today through the demos. I suspect a species that you're quite familiar with. This has been the subject of many articles. It's been in the news recently. This spotted lanternfly spreading really rapidly throughout the United States, first observed in Pennsylvania in 2014. It's originally native to Asia, and it's causing wilting and dieback. It eats a variety, it impacts a variety of plants and trees, but some of the most important crops that it's impacting are both hops and grapes. Think about the impacts of that. It's impacting our beer and our wine, and even hardwood trees. Well, let's get right to the demos today. Kind of the framework that I'd like to use for this series of demos is kind of this process of how invasive species move through the ecosystem. We'll look at introduction, establishment, spread, and impact. With introduction, this is the likelihood and the pathways through which an invasive species is introduced into an area. For the establishment, this is the species' ability to survive and reproduce in the new environment. We'll look at establishment primarily through two species distribution models. We'll look at this idea of spread, how quickly and extensively the species might move through the ecosystem. We'll use kind of a novel approach to look at the spread. It's kind of the resistance, the impedance of the species moving across the environmental landscape. And lastly, we'll look at, just very briefly, look at these ideas of impact. This is the ecological, economic, or social damage that these species might actually cause. This framework was outlined by Roy et al. In 2018, and it's something that just really speaks to me. I think it's very understandable. Okay, we're looking at ArcGIS Pro, our premier desktop analytical product. You'll see this is a project-based. I've created a project for this webinar today. And I have multiple maps here that represent each one of these workflows that we'll go through today. So let's add some data for an invasive species into this project. Do that by going to the map, by adding data. I'll browse for the data. I'm going to browse into that living atlas of the world that Sunny mentioned. And I'm going to look for that iNaturalist data. We've been privileged to partner with iNaturalist to add these data into the living atlas of the world. I'll go ahead and add that to my map. And this doesn't look like individual species, but they actually look binned because so many observations, we wouldn't want to plot them on the map. And we see the different groupings here. So each one of these dots represents many, many observations. Let's find out how many observations we're actually talking about. Tool just to get a count of the number of observations we have available. I can't quite see that. Let me pop it out. And that is a large number. It looks like over 95 million observations, research grade observations that are available in this data set to you. We don't want to work with all of those. Let's extract the data out just for our spotted lanternfly. So I'll export just those observations for the spotted lanternfly, and let me set a query on this. So I'm going to select records where the scientific name contains the actual scientific name for our spotted lanternfly. I'll go ahead and run this. This does take about 1.5 minutes to run. It does have to seek down through all of those 95 million records. I've sped it up a bit here, and we can see that we have our data within our mid-Atlantic to Midwestern states. And yes, Ohio is a Midwestern state. And we can see there are quite a few observations. And so what we want to do is kind of look to see how these will migrate westward. Okay, let's switch back to our slides. There we go. So in this very short, quick demo, we looked at data preparation. We've identified our study area. We introduced the iNaturalist data. You can see it's quite easy to extract any number of species that you want. And we're using citizen scientist observations in this. There are certainly alternative workflows for identifying those locations of invasive species. Many of the data sets that we just looked at in the previous presentation are great opportunities to go in and extract those features if you don't have human observations of them. So next, let's look at kind of introduction, the likelihood and the pathways through which that alien species might be introduced into the environment. The way that we'll look at is kind of the natural dispersal. Invasive species tend to spread from existing populations, and so we'll use a very simple technique in order to look at this through kernel density. So these are the observations that we have where citizen scientists have observed the spotted lanternfly. I just want to see how these observations might spread out across the landscape. So I have an output. I'm going to use an output cell size of about 5 kilometers so that it runs quickly. And I want to see how far do I want to spread those observations out. So I'll start with about 25 kilometers, and I want to look at expected counts rather than the densities. It's easier for me to wrap my head around expected numbers there. Let's go ahead and run this. It's a fairly quick tool. And you can see that the densest observations, it looks like just out of New York. Let's see what would happen if I would spread those even farther. So they're looking at 50 kilometers. Yep, we do kind of start to see that westward spread of this species. Let's go even 100 kilometers. You can see that these run pretty quickly. We're starting to see concentrations around the Pittsburgh area. And then 250 kilometers here. And we're seeing spread, but it's spreading into the ocean. And that's not very realistic, but we do see this cone moving westward. So let me set a barrier feature just to the boundary of the states that we're looking at and run this again. And because that is a complicated boundary, it does take just a little over 1 minute to run, which I don't want to take our time. Let's go back to our slides here and switch to the slides. There we go. And I captured a screenshot of what that might look when we're looking at the introduction, the potential introduction from known populations into areas where we're not sure if that species exists with just a simple kernel density. We tried that at various bandwidths compared it to the known extent, and it looks like a reasonable introduction path here. I did each of these kernel densities individually. I could have done them cumulatively. So taken the output of the first kernel density and then converted that to points and used that as the input to the second kernel density. Or I could have done these and added all of these kernel densities or expected counts up to get more of a cumulative impact of this. Next, we'll look at establishment. This is the species' ability to survive and reproduce in a new environment. And we'll just use traditional species distribution models in order to do this. We'll look at two models, Maxent, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and also random forest. Both of these are fully implemented within ArcGIS Pro. And let's look to see what these would look like. We're back to our familiar study area here. Maxent is a presence background, so these blue dots represent places where we've observed spotted lanternfly. The grays represent areas where we've not observed it. So these are not absences, these are background. I've attributed each of these points, some 51,000 of them, with various environmental indicators, characteristics of the environment, things like precipitation, temperature, but an important one here is this wildness from NASA CDAC. This is the degree to which the humans have modified the environment, and a flag of 1 and 0, whether it's presence or background. So this is our Maxent tool. Presence only prediction. I'm putting those presence background in, my flag indicating whether or not I've observed something, and all of these explanatory environmental variables. I happen to be using all continuous variables here. I could include categorical variables, and the Maxent fits a mathematical model to the data to see if it can predict the presence. I could have thinned, but I created these points, so they don't need to be thinned. And I'm going to train the model, but at the same time, I'm going to predict across the entire study area. And this is going to give me a sense of the likelihood or how suitable are each one of those locations environmentally for the spotted lanternfly. I think I was showing there just very quickly all of the locations to which I'm going to predict. There we go. You can see I'm predicting at a very fine scale here. And I'm predicting using the same data that I'm training with. I could have used raster data here, and we have options to validate the predictions itself. Again, these are complicated models and they do take a fair amount of time to run. I've pre-run this and we can see that these are the likely places where the environmental characteristics are suitable for the spotted lanternfly. And as this is drawing here, I think you'll see that there's some noticeable patterns. We're getting high probabilities in places where we've already observed it. That's a good thing for the model. But we're also seeing spread kind of along transportation corridors. And that's kind of counterintuitive when you think that recent research has shown that it is human-mediated dispersals that happening. What I'm showing here is the quality of the model. We got an omission rate of about 12%. That is quite good. And the nice thing about the Maxent is it does give us a coefficient to kind of understand the importance, relative importance of each of those explanatory variables. So Maxent is the model that gives you the most information about what the impacts are of the environmental characteristics on this. Let's switch quickly to random forest, which we have to call forest-based classification and regression. Again, just another machine learning model. I'm going to use the same exact data to predict the locations with this model. Again, using that presence absence flag. It's categorical because I only have 2 values here. And I'm going to use the same exact explanatory variables. I'm going to predict right back to those same locations. Use the same explanatory variables. And we do have extensive diagnostics and validation options for this. So that this runs relatively quickly. We won't do that in this run. And what you're seeing here, I've pre-run this, and you can see these are the predictions coming out of random forest. As I swipe and compare those to the Maxent predictions, there's a lot of similarity, and that's a good thing. This is an ensemble approach to modeling, and when we get multiple models that agree, that gives us a little more confidence that we've chosen the correct variables and we're using an appropriate model. So that is, let's switch back to the slides here, a very quick demonstration of the capabilities of using species distribution modeling within ArcGIS Pro. The variables that I were using are primarily bioclimatic variables coming from a product called Chelsea. But you very well could have substituted many of those other variables that Brock was talking about with NDVI or leaf area index. I just happened to choose the variables that were bioclimatic in nature, but almost endless possibilities for the types of explanatory variables. Almost all of the data sources that were listed in the previous presentation could be included in this model. So we did 2 species distribution models, Maxent and random forest. And in a full sense of transparency and accountability here, that Maxent model ran for just a little over 3 minutes, and the forest-based model ran for just a little over 2 minutes. Let's quickly look at spread next. So this is how quickly and extensively the species might move through the ecosystem. And we're going to take a bit of a novel approach to this. So what we're doing here for looking at spread is that we'll identify locations where the species currently exists, and we'll just randomly pick some of those sites as being potential dispersal sites. And then what we want to do is from those dispersal sites, how easy would it be for the spotted lanternfly to move across the landscape? And so we do that with an impedance surface or a cost surface, okay? And I think this will make more sense when we actually see it in the demonstration. So we're back to our familiar study area. We have our Maxent probabilities here. Areas in red indicate a higher likelihood of the spotted lanternfly. Areas in blue, less. And so I want to identify those potential dispersal points, but I just don't want to do it randomly. I'm going to use a tool called Create Spatially Balanced Points to do probabilistic sampling. So I'm going to get 100 samples. I'm going to throw the samples across the study area, but it's going to put more samples in locations where the probability of the spotted lanternfly is higher. Let me fix this symbology for you. I get a little trouble seeing those dots. Let's make those bright yellow. So I think we'll be able to see here that we've identified potential dispersal sites, but we're more likely going to disperse from areas that have a higher probability. So our goal here now is to see from each one of these dispersal sites, how easy would it be for the spotted lanternfly to move out from these areas? Well, we're going to use a single cost surface here. This is the human footprint. So areas in green have been modified by humans quite extensively. So it's easier for the spotted lanternfly to go through those areas because it's been shown that it is human-mediated dispersal that is driving this pattern. So again, from each dispersal site, how easy would it be for the spotted lanternfly to spread out from those, given that cost surface, that impedance surface? I'm going to use a tool called distance accumulation. So I'll put these potential vectors in as my sources of the spread. I'll call this thing the spread risk. And I'm going to use the human footprint, which I've inverted the values because higher values have easier transport. Let me run this. This again is a relatively fast tool. Areas in green indicate where it would be easier for the spotted lanternfly to disperse. Areas in brownish reddish colors, it's less likely. We can see this spread. And we can also see kind of the impacts of some transportation corridors in there. So I think this lends weight to our idea of this human-mediated dispersal. Okay, so we've looked in demo number 4 at this probabilistic sampling of dispersal sites. Ideally, in a non-demo situation, I would do this many, many times and compare the results, not just rely on these first 100 random. We explored human-mediated dispersal patterns, and this has been outlined for the spotted lanternfly in Layden et al. In 2023. And I used a simplistic impedance surface here. One raster, just human impacts on the environment. Think about the possibilities here. You could create your own raster by overlaying multiple rasters, and you can include things like wind direction and elevation and, say, barriers in that raster. The possibilities are almost endless here. With your knowledge of each individual invasive species, you can create a much more sophisticated and probably more ecologically meaningful impedance surface. So this last demo will be the impact, and this is the ecological, economic, or social damage that might be caused. And there's many, many things that we could demo here. What I've chosen for today's demo is to simply look, given the risk of where the spotted lanternfly might spread, what locations should I maybe establish some monitoring sites at? Okay, so let's say we want to create a plot and we want to see if the spotted lanternflies come, or if they are there, how quickly do they damage the trees and plants? So this is a task of monitoring. I've chosen to do this for Ohio. These are the maxent probabilities for Ohio. I'm going to use a machine learning-based tool called Locate Regions to try to identify places where I might monitor. And I probably want to put those monitoring sites in locations where there's a high probability that the spotted lanternfly would be there. Okay, so let's look at this Locate Regions tool. Yeah, that area along the Ohio River there has very, very high probabilities. Yeah, I suspect that is where we'll see. But much of the rest of Ohio has relatively low suitability. So we're looking at the Ohio maxent. I want to find an area of 100 square kilometers that I might monitor. I'll call that region 1. I just want one region for right now. I want that region to be circular. And this algorithm is going to go out, look at all of these raster cells, find the circular area that is 100 square kilometers that has the highest suitability, the highest probability of occurrence within it. And indeed, it is this area right along the Ohio River there. Yep. Well, what if we were quite fortunate and got some of that grant money that Sunny was talking about, and we could fund multiple sites? We probably don't want to do that exclusively in one location. So I'm say we have money for 500 square kilometers. I know these are quite large, but they map well. And so let's see if we do multiple regions. So I want to choose 5 regions where I might monitor. I still want them to be circular, but I have lots of other choices for those. I want the highest sum, so I want the areas that contain the highest probabilities that there will be spotted lanternfly there. But I want to make sure there's at least 50 kilometers between these various sites. And indeed, it did pick 5 monitoring locations for me. I don't like this gray. Let's change that just quickly to yellow. You can see that it did pick the original one, and then it has identified the other optimal locations, and it's guaranteed that those are at least 500 kilometers, 50 kilometers apart. So that's a way to use machine learning in order to maybe optimize our monitoring sites so that we can assess the impacts that we're looking at. So we've identified optimal regions for monitoring. We've used a parameterized region growing algorithm. Sounds pretty fancy, but you can see in the tool, it's quite easy to use. And again, this was a simplistic analysis. Many more options for looking at the impacts of invasive species on the existing ecology, the economy, or social damage. Even simple things like overlaying these probabilities or summarizing these probabilities of occurrence within protected areas, it can be very powerful. So we've looked at introduction, establishment, spread, and impact. And I think that's sufficient demos. And I think we're just running a little over on time. So I'll turn it back to you, Sunny, and see if we have time for questions.
All right, fantastic. I think we do have a couple time for questions. We've got a lot of questions. And so some of them have themes though. So I'll be grouping these a little bit, just info for our attendees here. And for some that might be more in depth, I think we can follow up on a few of those as well when the materials go out. So I'm going to start, this is kind of a general question, and this has come up, I've watched the NASA tutorials as well. They just finished up an invasive species webinar about a month ago that was fantastic, and I was an attendee on those, and this question came up there as well. But, and I think I know the answer, but I want to invite all of us presenters to respond to it. Is there a spectral library for plants? And in my experience, I've seen some ad hoc efforts here and there, but I want to invite Brock and Kevin with any information they may have on this. I know USGS has a link to some. I've seen some articles in Google Scholar related to this, but I'm not aware of a whole centralized repository that's a spectral library for plants. How about you all?
The closest I've come to this, and I'll put it in the chat. Let's make sure I send it to everybody. Is this EcoSys? I think it's a nonprofit research institution, but this is the closest I've gotten. So I also have the USGS one too that I answered in one of the Q&As, and I think I shared that answer with everybody too.
Yes, Sunny, the only place that exists is in my heart and on my Christmas wish list.
Nice.
Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any authoritative and verified repository. This is a tremendous opportunity for this community, I think.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. I think it's an opportunity for our community to maybe tackle that as a priority issue. So a specific question for Brock with NASA here. Your mention of PACE got a lot of attention, and you may have answered some of these, but for the benefit of our audience in the recording, I'm going to kind of group these questions. PACE, first of all, what's its resolution? And can it be used, or is it thought that it could be used to identify microplastics and ocean pollution? And another commenter asked if it could be used for fresh water. So Brock?
Yeah, you know what? Let me get into the resolution here.
Right.
We have 3 instruments on PACE, and you know what? Let me drop this in here, this link, because we just gave a training on PACE, and if you're a native Spanish speaker, we offered it in Spanish as well. So let me put this in here. This will have a wealth of information that I am not the authority on, but I know that I helped produce this one. So let me see here. I don't have the resolution on me handy, but interestingly enough, the applications lead for PACE is in attendance here today.
Oh, nice.
So, so I hope I don't disappoint with my answer here.
No, definitely
Yeah.
not. That's pretty cool. So hopefully they're paying attention to the chat and they're
Yeah,
fine.
you know, I do have a table here.
Nice.
Whether it can be used for microplastics, well, the applications are all, I mean, it's all so new. So there's a community of practice with PACE. So if you go to the PACE website, there's forums on Earth Data forums where people are answering each other's questions, just like this, specific to PACE. So you can tag the PACE term there.
And I've noticed, Brock, you know, this happens a lot. A new data set comes out. There was probably some original intent, but then the creativity and the imagination of our user community is really what brings it to life. And we start to dive into these different innovative uses of data sets. So I definitely encourage folks to check out the community of practice Brock mentioned.
Yeah, and you know, it's just growing, right?
Yeah.
So, and then people are coming up with new applications. So yeah, the 3 sensors, the one in particular is the ocean color instrument, and it has a footprint of a little over a kilometer squared, and it can be used in inland water bodies.
Nice, fantastic. Okay, moving on to the next question, and I'll let our NAA folks tell me when we need to cut off. But there was a use of a term called analysis ready. And I think this was maybe brought during your presentation, but analysis ready data. I think our users want to know, what does that mean? When is data analysis ready? And I think it can mean maybe 2 different things for our NASA friends here, as well as for our friends here at Esri. So I invite both of you all to respond to that question briefly.
Sure, I can start. I would consider the iNaturalist to be an analysis ready. That has been authenticated and it is research grade. So it's gone through kind of a data cleaning process and has been marked as authoritative. What I'm seeing as a trend is folks not necessarily using raw data, but they're using these environmental information products. So I would say CHELSA data, all of those 19 bioclimatic variables organized and vetted would be an environmental information product that it's analysis ready.
All right, Brock, comments from you on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we are working to make more available, and the appears tool out of the LPDAC is a nice way to find some of those data sets. But it really goes into the level of the data. So raw data to level 1, level 2, they start getting geolocated. But I believe, at least with some data sets, there's an ARD label, and it helps users recognize the data that the definition being needing a minimum amount of pre-processing before you start analyzing it.
Nice. All right, fantastic. Okay, so this was a question that we got. I know a lot of the demo that we showed, Kevin, was focused on leveraging point data to then inform a model, but we got a really interesting question from a user asking if rasters themselves can inform models, which took me, at least in my mind, more to some of our deep learning capabilities and some of those. So I was wondering if you could touch on that a bit, if rasters themselves can be used to inform models for prediction.
Absolutely. So I chose to use points and then enrich those from the rasters. And I did that up front because I didn't want to take the time in the demo to extract all of those 19 bioclimatic variables onto the points themselves. Both models that I demoed today, the Maxent and the Random Forest, can consume those rasters directly. And since I wanted things to go quickly, does that answer the question, Sunny?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it does. And I think I'll add to that, that in Living Atlas, I want to let folks know that there's actually pre-trained deep learning models. So you can go check out some of those. You can also train your own deep learning models. So for an example that I just know of firsthand, there was an effort recently in the state of Tennessee here in the US to model wetlands using just the physical characteristics of what would derive a wetland and what would predict a wetland. And so this was an example of a deep learning model. And we leveraged a tool for this effort called the Wetland Identification Model in ArcGIS Pro. So that's an example specific to wetlands in that case. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can approach this. And I think yeah, there's a lot of resources on that. I think when we send out the resources, maybe we'll make sure to send some additional information there. Brock, I've got a question for you. And I don't know if this is a thing, but maybe it's an opportunity to talk about some of the training that you all have. A user wanted to know if there is a how-to for exploring Earth data specific for invasive species professionals. So that's really specific, but I think they wanted maybe to understand and be able to, I know exploring Earth data can be overwhelming, just like exploring Living Atlas can be. So I think they were wanting maybe a little more hand-holding. Is there resources available?
Yeah, if you go to the Q&A, I think I answered that directly, and the response should have gone out to everybody. Like you mentioned, that three-part series that we did on invasive species just this year is a great place to start. We design these for working professionals in mind, those who have a day job and don't have a week to take a course or whatever. We try to really get them in bite-sized pieces and have it not be too long. So I would suggest starting there.
All right, fantastic. Okay, and I want to double check. There's a few other questions that have come in. And so I'm trying to kind of group these and think about them in real time. So give me just a second here. Some are specific. There's a really interesting question here, and I think I'll actually take this one real quick. It's talking about the speed of drawing processes with raster data. And the question is really comparing what a desktop user might be experiencing when they're running software on their desktop versus running software in the cloud, and talking about the speed at which this draws. I know from personal experience, especially if you're working in the government, right? Government doesn't always give you the most amazing computer to use. And so that's where looking at running analyses using the cloud platform, so like ArcGIS Online, can really give you a lot of benefit to running these processes at scale and with incredible speed. And so that's some of what users might be experiencing when they run this on their desktop machine. This is a great question. I'm going to put this both to Kevin and Brock. How can these tools be used in the context of predicting how plant communities will migrate under climate change and apply these predictions to designing restoration projects? So really, I think the question gets at the root of bringing in climate predictors to then inform these models and predict and project into the future. maybe Brock, I might start with you on bringing in climate data and what climate data you're aware of that's out there. And then Kevin, I'll pass it to you to answer the question as well.
Yeah, also a great topic, and I'm glad this was asked, because there's one thing about monitoring what's happening, but how do we prepare for what's coming up? So there's a NASA GIS out of New York City, and they are working on climate projections, and the person that leads that is very well in tuned and writes for the IPCC report. We have had a couple trainings where he was our guest speaker, because we do find this to be a topic that's always being asked in our trainings. So I'll drop the link in there, but yeah, it's climate projections. He kind of walks through how to choose which climate projections depending on the application that you're looking for. He kind of helps you guide. He doesn't prescribe one in particular, but he helps people kind of wrap their mind around it when it comes to these types of proposal writing and trying to get ahead of a problem. I'll drop it in there as well, but
Nice.
that's a great resource for climate projections.
Thank you. And Kevin, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. What a wonderful question. What we typically do with this is that we run these species distribution models with historical climate baselines, and we got those from Chelsea dataset. The wonderful thing about that dataset and other ones like WorldClim is they have projected those same 19 bioclimatic variables into the future over various emissions outcomes. So various pathways that we might take in order to mitigate climate change. And I've often rerun the models for species distribution models at baseline, and then what would happen in the future with kind of status quo, middle of the road, kind of most extreme greenhouse gas emissions, and see how those distributions, those suitabilities change. It's a recent blog that we can point to, Sunny, that shows the workflow for that.
Oh, fantastic. I was just going to say that. I know we've got some materials, and we've even done some demos at the user conference that have leveraged climate data and kind of predicting that issue into the future. So I know we've got a lot of resources on that. I think, so I'm being told we have time for one more question. And I want to kind of selfishly take this opportunity. A user has asked, is there documentation on all the work process is involved in the data necessary before running Maxent and random forest modeling? I think fundamentally this is a question that is a bane of every GIS user's existence, related to data cleanup, data engineering, data accessibility, making it analysis ready. And so Kevin, I think we probably both have similar answers on this, but there's a lot of data that you can explore in ArcGIS Living Atlas that you can pull in directly. But I know we have a wealth of new data engineering tools that have evolved over the past few years. Can you speak to those data engineering tools real quick?
Certainly, it's kind of a neglected part of the analysis workflow for GIS. We often just assume that you had wonderful, perfect, pristine data, and that's never the case. 80% of the analysis sometimes is cleaning up the data. So we produced a new suite of tools for data engineering. If you're on the data science side, they call it feature engineering, that allows you to identify outliers, fill in missing values, kind of the general cleaning of your data. And so we call that data engineering, and you can just Google the blogs on that for some introductory workflows.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. I want to thank again Brock from NASA for joining us. And Kevin, thank you so much for these amazing demos, but a big thank you to the Natural Areas Association for hosting this for everyone. We had a fantastic turnout, and all of the materials again will be available, but I want to pass it back to Moira with Natural Areas Association to close this out.
So yes, let me echo what you just said, Sunny. Thank you so much to everyone who's here. Thank you, Brock and Kevin, and of course, Sunny, for hosting this wonderful program. I can just see follow-on agenda items and follow-on programs that we need to do because the questions were just so relevant. So I'm glad everyone was able to join us. Thank you so much, and thank you for staying for the 90 minutes. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.